So I'd like to welcome you on behalf of our organization, Welcoming America, to today's discussion, which is titled Bridging the Divide, Hosting Crucial Conversations Between Diverse Communities and Law Enforcement. My name is Anthony Salas. I am the events director with Welcoming America. And since this is a public webinar, I do want to share a little bit about our organization for those of you that may not be familiar with us. Welcoming America is a national nonprofit organization, and we lead a movement of inclusive communities who are all working together to ensure that everyone belongs and are valued contributors to their respective communities. Our membership is made up of close to 300 organizations across the US. We also have a number of organizations who are partners and members across the globe. These are nonprofit and government organizations, and they, again, work together with each other. And as members, some of the benefits that they receive are access to exclusive resources, expert coaching, strategy planning, and access to diverse and practical communities of practice. So if you would like to learn more about our organization and possibly become a member, I invite you to go to welcomingamerica.org. Before we get started, just those few quick important housekeeping items. The webinar is being recorded, and all registrants will get a copy of this recording within about 48 hours of the close of the webinar, along with any resources and information shared. If there are any AI bots that are brought into the webinar, they will be removed. Since we are recording the webinar, we will provide that officially for you. So we will remove any others. If you have questions related to either the Zoom platform or any technical questions, I invite you to use the chat box and enter those questions there, and I will work with you individually. And if you have content-related questions as we go through our discussion today, I invite you to use the Q&A feature to enter your questions there, and we'll either answer your questions while the discussion is going on, or we will pose them at the end of the discussion. All right, so I am very, very happy to introduce our panelists joining us today. First, we have Matthew De La Rosa. He is the Deputy Chief of the Englewood, New Jersey Police Department. Matthew McKinney, who is a police sergeant with the Urbana, Illinois Police Department. Carlea Moore, who is a police sergeant with the Brookhaven, Georgia Police Department. And we are very honored to have Dr. Sherry Skaggs from the Public Information, who is a Public Information Officer with Faulkner County, Arkansas's Sheriff's Office. She's going to be moderating the discussion with our panelists today. I do want to again thank all of you for taking the time to join us and for sharing all of your experience and information with our webinar attendees today. Looking forward to a great discussion. And with that, Sherry, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Anthony. So good afternoon, everyone. If you're in some different time zones, good morning to you. So we'll have a few points today that we'll pull up some PowerPoint slides that some of our participants have shared, but I'm very excited for this panel today. A little bit of information about me. Thank you for the quick introduction, Anthony. So as Anthony said, I serve as the Public Information Officer for Faulkner County Sheriff's Office in Arkansas. It's a little ways outside Little Rock, if you're not familiar with the area. I see I have some wonderful Conway, Arkansas natives in here in the chat, so welcome. In addition, I'm a faculty member at the University of Central Arkansas, and my research and teaching area as an academic is police community relations. So this is most definitely up my alley, and I'm excited, and I hope you're equally excited to hear from some of our participants today in this module. So as Anthony said, we're coming from all across the nation. Please welcome, I'll let you say a quick hello, Deputy Chief De La Rosa from New Jersey.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be here, and thank you for hosting this.
And please join me in welcoming Sergeant Matt McKinney from Illinois.
Hi, everyone. It's my pleasure to be here also. Look forward to sharing some great ideas with you guys and hearing your insight and opinions as well.
And Sergeant Moore from Georgia.
Hello, everyone. Happy to be here and excited to have some very transparent conversations with you guys.
So we have a couple of questions today that we're going to center our major dialogue about. I'll be asking our participants a few follow-up questions throughout that. As Anthony said, if you stumble across questions along the way, please feel free to put those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to those towards the end of the dialogue. We will turn it to public Q&A. So our first kind of topic of conversation, and I really love to hear from you first on this, Deputy Chief De La Rosa, is how do you and your department, in your experience, facilitate effective dialogue with community members?
So we have the administration we have now is only about 2-3 years old. We were actually taken over by the county prosecutor's office about 4 years ago, and community policing, community engagement was never a priority beforehand. Actually, the police union did about 100 times more than the department did. So when we took over, community engagement is a huge part of what we do. We budget for it. We make it a priority. And at the end of the day, you know, the more contacts you have and the more positive contacts you have they just pay dividends. You know, especially in the world we live in now where everything is Instagram, Facebook, texting, when you can put people in front of other people and really start to humanize each other and understand each other, you just have better results. So we did Faith in Blue. We send officers to Plesset, and we make sure that we're known to people. And we make a point, and from the top down, you know, when you interact with people, it will reverberate for a good amount of time. And, you know, you can poison the well if you have bad interaction. So we kind of force our officers to get put in situations where they're interacting with the community. And we've seen the growth in the understanding, compassion, and understanding with the members of our community by doing that.
Deputy Chief, you mentioned involvement in Faith in Blue as well as in Plesset. For our friends that are unfamiliar with what those activities are that are on the webinar today, could you expand on that a little bit?
So Faith in Blue is a part of Movement Forward, and the simple answer is you're putting officers and your staff in the houses of worship. They're interacting with the houses of worship and the religious groups. And we started out kind of small. We started out, we probably have about 40 or 50 houses of worship in 5 square miles in Englewood. And we start out small. We started out with about 5. It's grown to about 12 or 15. And we just put officers in for services. And, you know, there's a set weekend we do it, but we do it all year round. So especially in October, it's very tough for the Jewish houses of worship because those are usually their high holiday times of the year. So we'll do it in April or we'll do it in June. And we just make a point. We try to hit up, you know, every single house of worship we can. We'll send 1 or 2 officers in to meet people. We have our community events. We started an interfaith council where we have all the leaders of the house of worship come and meet with us once a year. And we talk about the things we can do better and the things we can work on. And it just builds a relationship that has really helped us out. And, you know, on a personal note, just with Englewood, when we started Faith in Blue, we were just starting. We made friends. We made sure it was not on Instagram. It was not on Facebook. We had our first meeting with our Interfaith Council. And by not taking pictures, some of the pastors and reverends told us, well, you guys aren't looking for a photo op. You guys are actually looking to build relationships. And unfortunately, about 8 months after that, we had an officer-involved shooting that was fatal here in Englewood. So like one of the reverends told us, we're making rainy day friends when it's sunny. So those relationships we built were able to really help us navigate some really trying times here in Englewood.
So, Sergeant Moore, the activities that he's talking about, such as Faith in Blue, is this also something that you and your department participate in as well? Could you share a little bit about that?
Yes, I am actually from Brookhaven Police Department. It's in Georgia with 13.2 square miles, but we have close to 70,000 residents. So we're really heavy when it comes to residents. And so for Faith in Blue for us, it's just an opportunity for us to bring our houses of faith together. Everybody meets on different days. And so we try to have our Faith in Blue spread out on a few different days so that we're able to kind of meet everybody where they're at. We've kind of had more intimate conversations, but we also have a community kind of celebration as well. And so do a big resource fair during those times. And so it allows an opportunity for us not to be just seen in those private moments, but for the community to see law enforcement working with those houses of faith. And so kind of like what Deputy Chief said, it's great to build those relationships on sunny days. So when it does rain, we are able to come together and not be strangers, but have really familiar faces in those moments. And so Faith in Blue has been a good foundation for us when it comes to certain incidents that have occurred in our city.
And Sergeant McKinney, is that something that you're also involved in?
Yeah, so my department has been a part loosely with Faith in Blue for a couple of years now. We haven't hosted because we have a couple of other neighboring agencies that have been kind enough to host and allow us to just partner. But we've also found great benefit in it. And then another thing that Chief De La Rosa touched on was the Plesset Conference, and that too is another one. It's an annual training focused on how to engage with people that are different from you. Police don't typically get that kind of focused training. And so that's another one that we kind of took away. And one of the big key points that I think is really important to me that Chief also kind of mentioned is just the consistency. Showing up on a regular basis, being in places where maybe we haven't typically been, so that people understand that we are there for them when they need us. Because you can name all the different reasons why people think we may not be there for support when it's needed, but consistency and regularly showing up without cameras necessarily or without fanfare provides the opportunity for people to really understand that any time of day the police are available for help.
So I think one of the things, about all of us on this call is that we're all from communities. I think our communities may differ, but inherently within our individual communities, there's a great deal of diversity, right? We talk about meeting people where they're at and how, big that is. How do you go about meeting your population where they're at when you're talking about such a diverse population that are in a multitude of different places that have different beliefs, maybe different languages and different language barriers? I'll turn it to whoever wants to take it.
So in Englewood, we are about as diverse as you can get. And, when we do our planning, we understand the different demographics, the different religions, the different languages, and you have to make a point. If you don't have a plan, you don't have an understanding of where you are, and you got to be honest with yourself. You can't walk in and think you do a phenomenal job and you can't improve on anything. We know we have to improve on some things, but we've reached out to pretty much every group we can. If there's ones out there, we always look to meet new people, new groups, and we make a point to touch base with those different demographics. So for instance, there's a church for all you Packer fans that are out there. St. Cecilia's is where Vince Lombardi got his start in coaching football here in Englewood. And that church right now is a predominantly Hispanic church. And the vast majority of the congregants speak Spanish. So we make sure we get our Spanish speaking officers in there, and they have some really good discussions. We've sent them in there quite a bit to talk about immigration and other things that go on. We reinforce with those communities that we are not ICE in New Jersey. We are directed to not have any interaction when it comes to immigration matters. And we just want to make sure everybody knows we're here to help. So we identify these groups. We try to set up our officers that are best to speak with those groups when there are language barriers. But we also understand, you you can't send just your African American officers to African American churches. You're not going to bridge a gap that way. You make sure the officers that typically wouldn't interact with different groups of people, they start interacting with those people, and you break down the barriers. And at the end of the day, everybody realizes everybody's just people. The other stuff really doesn't matter, and we're here to help everybody. So we kind of target that, and we come up with plans to achieve those goals.
Sergeant Moore, for you, are there any particular partnerships that your agency has had that has helped you facilitate that and get out with different diverse populations within your community?
So we have a ton of partnerships, and I think everything possibly starts to that you don't have to have an event or a program to have those conversations. It's all about just stepping outside the car and just having just casual conversations, because those more casual conversations allow the ice to be broken a little easier when we're just able to talk one-on-one. And so we do have multiple programs that kind of go towards speaking to different diverse groups. And I do a really kind of speak to Deputy Chief in the sense that you don't have to always have the like-minded officer to go in those areas. You really got to mix and bridge gaps. The gaps don't bridge with, those who are culturally connected or those who look like. You got to bridge the gap with everybody because when you call on the police, you don't call on the person who looks like you call on the police. And so bridging that gap just by, officers, police officers, but we got to show the human side. And so being able to come and show that human side is kind of the things that we do. But we do have, I'll say one of our biggest programs that's helped us a lot, and even in this time, is our Spanish Citizens Police Academy. And so even in the times we are in now, that has been my biggest class. And I actually had to turn people away from that class, even in the climate we're in. And I believe that it's because of the relationships we've built and them wanting to learn more, understand more about what goes on in Brookhaven and our stance with ICE and our stance with everything we do, but also learning how we as a community can come together to work together as well and continue to build those partnerships.
So I think you brought up actually an excellent point. You said that, it's not just about events, like you have to just get an officer out of the car, the regular everyday conversations, right? And I think a lot of people think when they think about police community relations, a lot of people think, well, this is an event. The police department is hosting an event, right? And that tends to be sort of a misunderstood concept there. So one of the big criticisms, when we talk about events and hosting events is that a lot of times the people that will come to the event anyway are people that maybe trust or already have good relationships with the police departments. How can we better use the get out of the car, have interactions, shoot hoops on the basketball court, everyday conversations to strengthen and better build the connections with community members that probably wouldn't show up to events?
I think if I can jump in there, sorry. Yeah. I think some of the biggest things is we have to be, as police officers, we have to make it a cultural, organizational, foundational point that we're comfortable being uncomfortable in spaces where we haven't typically been. Yeah, we have to think outside of the box and be creative when we're trying to make these moments. And I think doing things like having it at other people's home turf, giving it on neutral ground. A lot of times police departments have typically hosted things in their place, at their building, their police department. And that draw is not normally there because people feel uncomfortable showing up at the police department. And so providing opportunities where you can host events or show up at places where we haven't typically been is a huge milestone and hurdle for agencies to be able to reach out and touch communities that they haven't typically been able to touch. And so like our agency, for instance, is really focused on trying to be on college campus on a regular basis and let the college students know what we're providing and what resources we have. We've also partnered with other organizations within the community and given them the lead, let them host, but with us in partnership and us there so that we can kind of tap into some of their resources and not run people off by saying it's a police hosted event. But hey, the police are here. And if you have questions, we're open, we're ready to talk. We want to have those hard conversations. But making that a cultural norm within our agency is the foundation and the starting point that I think everybody has to be okay with, from the baseline patrol officer all the way up to administration. People have to be comfortable and okay having those uncomfortable moments to try and build on these relationships that we need to, focus on.
And what are y'all's recommendations for improving that culturally within departments? If we had a representative or an administrator from a police department on this call, what would you tell them for how to strengthen that culturally within their own department?
I think you have to have cultural-based training, as well as just candid conversations. Even without you have the training, you still have to go out into the field to learn. And so for us, we have actually a mosque that's pretty much a 5-minute walk from us. And so, typically with the mosques, they don't allow women in certain areas or spaces. And so navigating that space to kind of allow them to come to the police department, or we come there and meet in the parking lot and have conversations. But it's kind of like what Sergeant McKinney said, it's all about being uncomfortable in those situations so that you can become comfortable. But I think the best part is, while you do have training, it's the experience training that you have too. And it doesn't just have to be your community engagement unit, it's your officers too. So when they're on a call, when they're speaking to it, there's another way to engage and to show another level of respect or build some type of trust just by the interaction that they have when dealing with that incident. So it's not always geared to the to a certain union or a department, in that it's geared to the agency itself. And I think the stride comes to building trust is just to how we interact with individuals who we may not come in contact in our normal daily lives.
Deputy Chief, I'd love to hear from you. How do you think that advice is sort of interchangeable regardless of differing size agencies? So when we talk about some police departments, some are extremely large agencies with a great deal of personnel, more manpower, so to speak, more resources, available money, training opportunities, and others are very small departments. Many people don't realize that actually the vast majority of departments around our country, we're talking about a dozen or fewer officers within those departments. So we're significantly more strapped for resources and staffing availability. How would you recommend officers from those departments better interact and connect with community members?
So community engagement, I don't even think if you really need a program or a unit. I think it has to come from the top down. And the one thing I've explained to my personnel is that, why are we here? And we're here to help people. I took this job because I want to lock up the bad guys and play cops and robbers. And at the end of the day, I started out and I was kind of a stormtrooper, and I just locked as many people as I could up. And then all of a sudden you come to the realization, if you start to engage and know people in the community, and a lot of these relationships started because I would go on these blocks that a lot of the cops wouldn't go down, and I had no problem jumping out of the car and chasing people and locking people up. And they saw I was trying to do the job. So I started developing relationships with people. And you have to explain to your younger cops, or just your cops in general, you can only be out there for so many hours. And depending on how busy it is, there's only so much time you can spend focusing on a problem. But if you engage that community, now instead of having 2 eyes, you have 20 or 30 or 50 around the city that are going to tell you what's going on and who's doing what. So if you want to be there to take bad guys off the street, protect vulnerable people from being victimized, if you engage with the community, you've just completely synthesized your reach. So now instead of it's just you in a patrol car, now you have all these other people that are going to help you identify who are the people victimizing the community, who are the people selling drugs, who are the people trafficking. And I have a ton of officers that go out there and do it. And it's just it's a much smarter way of doing your job. And unfortunately, perception is reality. So if your officers in your department is not perceived well, you're not going to have a good welcoming relationship with your community. The more you go out there and the more you make contacts and you show people you're here for the right reasons, you're going to get that buy-in and you're going to be much more effective. So especially, we're very thankful. We have all these guys that want to come in and do, old school police work. And if you show them a better way of doing it, I think you get the buy-in there, that in and of itself. And it just kind of will continue to just build off of that.
So I think you bring up an interesting point there, and especially from sort of the academic realm of policing, one of the big things that is talked about is this notion of conflict management versus conflict resolution, right? So we think that, conflict resolution is the way to go and just try to avoid conflict. But in reality, bringing people together from diverse backgrounds and actually working towards benefits and solutions that strengthen relationships across and build bridges, a more conflict management approach is really actually the way to go and what's recommended. And part of the reason for that is not only we talk a little bit about why it's important for police departments to strengthen their relationships with community members, but also making sure community members understand why it's important to build and strengthen relationships with the police departments. So can you all share a little bit, and I'd love to direct it to you first, Sergeant Moore, just about the benefits involved in a community that has very strong community relations? Do we see things like crime reduction in those communities or better reporting rates, or what changes could we expect if we lived in a community that had very strong relations?
Well, I can say I work in a community with very strong relations. We have our crime like everybody else, but we have a very supportive community in the sense of we have had incidents where we could have had a huge protest, but we didn't. We had people coming and ask, what does the department need, or our officers are okay. So there was a level of trust that was built. And so when you have communities that have great partnerships, I believe your trust is really what's built first, which allows for, more partnerships in kind of the things that you have, but also your crime is reduced to a certain extent, but everybody comes to other places to do crime. But I believe you have more eyes, you have more people willing to help solve the crime that occurs, and then you have more support for the department to have more technologies or more training or more tactics or more equipment to be put in place. And so for us, we're big on technology. And so because of the support of our community, we're allowed to implement different technologies that decrease our response time to certain calls, or people wanting to donate or pour in more to how can we make sure the police department has what they have so that we can still continue to live in a safer community. And so I just believe those partnerships allow for more transparency, because there's a level of accountability for us that we have, that as our trust and partnership grows, there's an expectation for us to be very transparent with what we do and how we interact in those ways. And so I just think that those partnerships it's another connecting factor to what makes it to be a good, strong, and safe working relationship for communities and police officers.
And Sergeant McKinney, what are your thoughts on that in terms of what can we expect if we have a community with a strong partnership?
Sure. One of the things that I think is kind of interesting to note a lot of times, and I've seen it play out a couple of ways from a handful of agencies, but crime actually can increase a little bit when you are really engaged with the community, and not the actual crime, but the amount that it's reported. And so I think that's a really telling thing that we miss a lot of times, is that people don't feel comfortable reporting crime. And that's especially in different communities where there's been poor relationships with law enforcement in the past. They don't come forward. They don't report. They're worried about their status as a citizen, or for whatever reason, they don't report. And so when you have a good relationship, or when you're building one, a good tell that things are building and you're gaining momentum is that your crime reporting actually increases. It shows that your relationships within the community are building trust, and that people feel comfortable coming forward in times where maybe in the past they hadn't. And so that's a very common trend, especially early on when an agency starts to really focus on those relationships, is that you see the increase start to happen. To me, that's a positive signal. What a great problem to have, that the citizens in your community feel confident coming forward and reporting things to you when maybe in the past they haven't. And so I think that's a big thing to look at as things are building. Is it may look like crime is spiking, but realistically, it's just always been occurring. You're just hearing about it now, and you have the opportunity to help people that maybe in the past you hadn't.
And Deputy Chief, what would your thoughts on that be?
That was Sergeant McKay. That was extremely insightful. That's actually the case. When it comes to statistics for crime, the sort of joke was, I can eliminate pretty much all the crime. We can just stop taking reports or report things in a different way. It's not about that. But we had an incident just like that. We had a nightclub open up in an area that's really not suited for staying up too late, a whole bunch of different quality of life issues. And we had one complainant that was consistent. So we sent a Spanish speaking officer out to literally knock on every single door in the neighborhood. And some of the answers we got were really eye opening. A bunch of the people said, well, we didn't think the police cared because they didn't stop it. And we tried to explain to them, when it comes to certain quality of life things, we understand that there are neighborhoods that accept things and don't have issues with their neighbors having louder parties. So we're only going to respond when you complain. So once we did that, we started getting all these calls, and we actually got a bunch of information where this one spot was an issue. So, the calls we got increased because people felt more comfortable speaking with us and felt more comfortable complaining, and knowing that when it comes to, some people think there's smaller issues, but when you have bass through the roof at 1 a.m., that's a big problem for me. But if you don't have an issue with it because you're all up, we're not going to go interject in people's lives. So what the sergeant said is completely accurate. You are going to get a jump, but it doesn't really tell the actual story of what's going on.
So I think you raise a good point. And there's in academia, we call that the dark figure of crime, right? Crimes that happen, but the police don't have information about them. They're never reported to law enforcement, but ultimately you have a community that knows that they happened, right? It could in some cases be a shooting, it could be a more private, personal, domestic violence related issue, a sexual assault issue. There are a number that are particularly low in their reporting rates across the country. And we know that when we talk about diverse communities, it can be particularly more problematic for some people to report just because of the fear of the interaction with law enforcement, right? And fear of interaction of possible consequences associated with law enforcement. We're kind of in a time now that, I come from an area, I'm here with, we have a large Hispanic population. And one of the concerns, that we hear is an immigration concern. And even if, my husband lays hands on me or my boyfriend lays hands on me, I'm afraid to report it because I'm afraid I'll get deported, right? So what would your thoughts on that be, Sergeant McKinney?
Yeah, thank you for asking. And my agency's been trying to be very forward-thinking and cognizant of all of the community members. Just because you came here differently than anyone else doesn't mean that you don't have rights still. And so we've tried to be very open and transparent with our social media platform. We've provided some infographics, not all of them that we've made. We've kind of borrowed some from other agencies. Chicago PD put out a great one. We partner with the YMCA, the University of Illinois YMCA, who also works with Welcoming America, and some of the things they've done, like this infographic that's showing currently, talks about some of the recommendations for first responders. And so in our partnership with them, they've done studies and shown what they find really important. And by sharing this information and putting it out there, both in English, Spanish, French, we have a French Congolese population that's pretty large because of the university, but putting this information out on a regular basis, on our social media platform in multiple languages, and giving people the understanding that, while we have laws that we have to enforce, that everybody has rights and everybody can be a victim, and everybody should feel comfortable and confident they come to us and report, is a big thing for us. And so we've kind of used our social media footprint to do that, as well as when we're hosting events. Our city has been great about hosting events. that aren't directly hosted by the police department, but that we're a part of, where we can share some of these things, like the short-term strategies that we have on how to promote interactions. This all documents and explains some of that. And the infographic that we use to share some of how to interact with ICE, or what to do if you encounter ICE, was another great way that we kind of shared what our intentions were. This is an example of that. So, it doesn't have anything saying not to cooperate or not to work with anyone, or that we won't cooperate or work with anyone, but we shared what to do in this situation. And so a lot of people had that question, and we shared it in English and in Spanish, because there were a lot of people in our community that were concerned that if they called us, that somehow ICE was going to be notified. And so we informed them that that's not the case. And, these are your rights. If you do encounter an ICE agent, or if you're working and ICE happens to show up, how do you manage that? And who can you reach out to? And that did give us quite a bit of credence in the Latino community. And it's been helpful to kind of build those bridges a little bit and show, while we do have laws that we have to enforce, you have the ability to call us and expect the same treatment, whether or not your immigration status is in question or you're concerned.
What about other causes for concern of lack of reporting? So what if ICE is not my concern? What if fear of retaliation, or fear that the police just won't do anything to help me is an underlying concern? What would you tell community members with those concerns?
Sure, and it's another large concern. We've created a bunch of different avenues for that. We've had them for a while, and I think most police agencies have them, but it's about sharing that information and getting that out to the public. That's a big one. But things like anonymous reporting, or text to 911 is another big one that we've been using for a while. And third-party reporting, our online reporting software. There are a whole bunch of different avenues where people can reach out to us, even through our social media. And we've been more communicative about how to get in touch with us. And if you want to remain anonymous, or you don't want us to knock on your door, but you'd love to give us a phone call about what's going on. But I think giving people different avenues of how to contact us has really opened up our ability to take reports from people that maybe historically have felt like it could be, detrimental to their situation of where they live. The neighbors might be mad that they called the cops. Okay, well, we don't have to come to your door to get the same information, or we don't have to put you out by, enforcing something. And that's been a huge kind of lift in that relationship building as well.
How do I trust that you did respond, right? So if I report something and I'm in home, or I go to bed, or I'm at work, or I'm doing whatever, maybe you have had an interaction and responded, but I've not seen that call, or I've not been privy to that interaction. How do I have faith and trust that interaction actually occurred? Is there any follow-up with me over that?
I would say that, if I'm being honest, I think that's one of my agency's shortcomings. It's something that we've worked on, but I think I've seen some really great stuff going forward that I'm really trying to wrap my mind around and advance for our agency. But I think there are a lot of great ways that you can have a forward-facing website that tells community members what you've been doing and where you've been responding. And so I've seen a lot of really great different websites set up that show that. I think another one is, again, just being communicative. That to me, it's a baseline police officer move, that when you clear a call, if the person that called was frustrated about something, you call them back and let them know the resolution. And that's another huge one. And whether that's an email or a response to the text 911 or social media, those are big ones. And then sharing your data and sharing your information, being transparent is also huge in that. So showing what calls for service you went on, or heat maps for crime, and why you've been policing in a specific area, maybe more often than regular, all kind of lend towards that same thing.
So if I'm a community member, Sergeant Moore, and I don't know, how to get the news from my police department. I really don't know what these avenues are. Maybe I just moved to the area. Every department has different avenues. Some are on Facebook, some are on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. We got websites out there. How do I find out really how to better engage in my community? And what is the responsibility of a police department in terms of making information sort of widely accessible? I think you're muted there,
I
sir.
am. All right. I think that goes to the transparency of the agency itself. But I believe I speak for, kind of most departments. We want to get information out there. And so, like you said, we do have a lot of avenues when it comes to social media and all those cases. But the first place would be to go to the website. Go to the website. A lot of police departments have websites that can tell you how they deliver information. Most agencies, what we do next door and ring. And so we're always posting a lot of different areas. We personally have an app that we kind of put information on as well. And so it goes to the different members of your community. Everybody not be technology based and savvy. So you do have your seniors who also, may not be able to get on a computer or a telephone. And so that's another opportunity for an officer or a community engagement to go to certain businesses and seniors living homes to provide information. So, there's always the first place is to call the police department and ask, how can I get information or how can I get more involved? And then if the department is having an event, just go by the event. It's always great to meet an officer so that you can learn more about the agency, learn more about the events, anything in person, as well as through kind of technologies and opportunity. But, the first place to do is go straight to the source, and that's to the police department to figure out how can I learn and know more. But I also think as a community too, if you go to that agency and maybe you have a suggestion for how information can be delivered, is to provide that suggestion as well. We learned a lot that WhatsApp was big for our Spanish-speaking community. So it allowed us to kind of dig a little deeper to figure out what WhatsApp is and kind of figure out how we can house a community on there. And so we're looking into for our Spanish Citizen Police Academy and those alumni is building a smaller community on there to be able to deliver information. And so for the department itself to just be open to figure out how to provide more information, different channels, but for the community to also provide suggestions too as ways to better provide information. So in different languages or more video, because not everybody can read or write in certain languages. Anything that you can suggest is an opportunity for transparency for both the community and the agency.
So I think you're bringing up some great points in this idea of transparency. And we talk about transparency a lot when we talk about police community relations. It's obviously a large public concern. And as a member of the public, what is it fair to expect in terms of my police department being transparent with me? Like, what information should I expect? Everything to be shared, or what's kind of the timetable behind when you have to share that? And I'd love to hear this from you, Deputy Chief De La Rosa, as an administrator. What is a realistic expectation for a community member on police transparency?
This is kind of a tough one because it's subjective. I think our biggest hurdle is, the internet and Sergeant Moore, I believe you brought up the WhatsApp text groups. We have communities that live on their own WhatsApp text groups, and we're lucky enough to have informal partners that will assist us with that. They'll let us know what's being discussed so we can stymie some of the misinformation that goes out, because sometimes things are spread and they are not accurate. So it helps us put something out to kind of set the record straight. But as far as responsibility and expectation, it'll vary from topic to topic. And when it comes to crime, the reporting of crime, somebody will see something happen. Next thing you know, it spreads like wildfire. And we do get the complaints that, why didn't the department let us know? And we kind of have to hammer home that at the end of the day, we would love to tell everybody everything. But when it comes to certain things, we can't publicize active investigations we're working on. And we kind of hit on the fact that if we publicize everything that's going on, you're going to allow people to know things that we don't want them to know because we're actively trying to investigate them. So those are some of the biggest issues we have with that. And I think it's just been over time, our community's learning that we will put the information out, but we can only put the information out when it's appropriate, when it's not going to harm an active investigation.
So is it fair to say then that just because maybe it takes a couple of days or sometimes a couple of weeks or sometimes even longer before I receive all the information about a case that you're not saying that's lack of transparency, right? You're saying that time is needed to protect the investigation. Can you expand on that?
Absolutely. So, in a case, we had an incident where we arrested 2 people for burglaries. We knew there were 2 other people involved. We can't put out that we're still seeking 2 other people because we don't want those 2 other people to know that they were there. We don't want them to get information from what we've learned and then post it out there so they know they're wanted and they leave the area. When we do have certain situations, we will put out a vague statement basically saying we're investigating it. Please look back for updates, but understand, we're investigating a crime and there's only so many details we can provide at this time. Oh, you're muted. You're muted, Sherry.
My apologies. Sergeant Moore, Sergeant McKinney. We talk about seeing, maybe a video on Facebook or we've seen, just some stuff come out, but we haven't heard from our police department yet, don't necessarily really know what's going on. What are the struggles in terms of that? What are the problems associated with relying on social media or, the 30-second video clip to tell me about a situation?
All right, I'll take it.
Awesome. Yours. Yeah.
Okay, Matt, back me up. But I mean, everybody has a camera, and I always say, if you did something and you go to your Instagram, you get the right picture, the right thing, you show that 15 seconds because that's what's going to get you some likes, and that's what's going to, bring most interest. It kind of happens a lot when it comes to the department. Everybody's giving their different angle, but there's a lot that comes with an investigation of a crime or a certain incident. And so even though the police department hasn't responded, doesn't mean that they're not being transparent. It means that they're gathering all the facts because one thing about it with the police department, if they give you out something, the wrong information, then that's a knock to the trust that you're going to have with that police department. And so police departments put out information that still allows that level of trust to continue to be built. But also we don't want to misinform our citizens, and we want to make sure that scenes are safe. We want to make sure that the correct information is going out. And we also, if there's a certain person or personnel we're looking for, we want to make sure that it positions everybody to have a win in that situation. And so you're going to see a lot nowadays. There's not something that you're not going to see. But I would just like to give the share out to the, if everyone has a camera, while we have the camera out, to also call 911. It's one thing to have the camera out and not call for help or assist that person. And then it's another thing to not respect those loved ones who their loved one might have been harmed or something like that. There's a lot of times we see stuff on social media that their loved one has been harmed or certainly have died, and that's on social media before we've reached out to the loved ones. And so there's a special care and accountability that we all have to have to be more respectful of what we put online, but also know that just because their police department has a online doesn't mean that they're not doing anything. It means they're really working hard to provide the most correct information to be delivered.
Yeah, if I could jump in on that too, there's a filter out there that makes me even look good on camera. So, you can make anything look right. But seriously, the big issue is that we as an agency, as a police department, as a sheriff's office, we always have laws and policies that we have to follow when it comes to releasing information, whether it's an investigation or internal or external. There are policies and laws that we have to follow. And I think we have to do a good job of communicating what those laws are when people are asking, because people will ask for certain information and we can't just say we can't give that, it's an open investigation. That is a short answer. that cuts people off and makes them think that we're withholding information for our own benefit, or because we don't trust their judgment, or because we're trying to cover something up. And so I think if we're clear on why we can't release that information immediately, here are the state laws for my state that don't allow me to release this information. Here are the federal laws. Here are the reasons why we can't, skew a court case, because we don't want to, have this be in the media and then have somebody who is supposed to be presumed innocent already have, this cloud of guilt hanging over them based on the court of public opinion. And so when we share those reasons, I think that provides the openness, and that's really what transparency to me is: openness and communication. But providing that communication and openness of why we can't release it is a big factor that I think helps people understand where we're coming from. The regular, person in the public can throw it up on the internet immediately. We don't have that. We don't have that ability, and we have to share why we don't have that ability. I think that's a big factor for us.
So one of the big things we always see, when there's a video posted, is the demand for that body cam footage to be released. Is body cam footage always available in every situation? Does every department have body cams? What are the policies in terms of that?
So in New Jersey, we're obligated to have body cams. I mean, I think every law enforcement agency in New Jersey has body cams now. So typically there are situations where body cam malfunctions, an officer runs out on a hot call and doesn't have a chance to get it. But then there are also issues that come up. For instance, in New Jersey, a domestic violence incident is absolutely confidential. Sexual assault investigations, there are big parts of that are confidential. And the one thing we have to do, it's very tough in New Jersey, is, nobody really thinks about the victim. And I totally understand about transparency. And I think, sunlight is the best disinfectant. But at some point, we really need to start centering on the victim. So when it comes to body cam footage, it's usually always available. We actually had an officer that ended up breaking down a door of a house on fire and saving 3 people. And we're like, we can't wait to see this body cam footage. And the officer forgot to put it on because he ran out of the car without it. So sometimes it's not available. Usually it's there. And there are situations where, we would consider releasing it on our own. We think very carefully and thoroughly when we do that. And we've also had instances where people have said stuff online, and we've had conversations and say, listen, if you keep this up online, you keep spreading false facts out there, we're just going to release the body cam, and you can deal with it that way. And 99.9% of the time, the comments are removed and the story disappears because the truth is on film. And I think the body cams are a phenomenal tool for us.
Sergeant Moore, Sergeant McKinney, do you have anything to follow that up with?
Yeah, so our agency, the state of Illinois, also has, a very similar set of circumstances. The law says when we can and can't release it. There are very limiting factors on when we can't, and they revolve around victims' rights and victims' advocacy. But we try to be as open and quick to release body cam footage as possible. But again, it largely revolves around state law and federal law. And typically when we explain that well, we get a good response back. I think the issue in the past and historically is we haven't felt the need to justify our actions. And so Chief nailed it on the head, though, explaining the way we release body cam and why we release it is a big question mark to a lot of people at times. And when you explain why, it tends to be a lot easier and a lot better received.
Sergeant Moore, did you want to add to that?
No, I think they've hit it. I mean, there's nothing more to say about body cameras. And that's it.
So I want to turn, I kind of want to turn this conversation and leave us today at least with a sense of hope, both from the police side of things as well as from the community side of things, and move forward. And how can we move forward in a positive direction? One of the struggles when we talk about transparency, we talk about information gathering. Sometimes that information is not always accurate that we've seen lately with social media that concerns a lot of people is um, arguments around the agreements with relationship to ICE. And we've already had a few questions today that have come through the chat as well about that. So I know you talked a little bit about this earlier, Sergeant McKinney, but how can I expect my police department to really protect me? To protect what my rights are when, I've heard that they have to turn me over to ICE or you're required to work with ICE because there's been a lot on social media lately that says that. So what level of protection can I still expect from you if I'm in your community?
Sure. Yeah, I think you have to be really careful if you're in that situation. I think you have to understand maybe what your agency has promoted and put out there. I know what our agency's stance has been, and we've been very forward, with the community about explaining that. If you're an agency or a provider of care in a community, if you work for a nonprofit or public health or you name it, and you know that an agency in your community does take the stance of they have to provide information on a regular basis or contact with the police equals contact with ICE. I think understanding that and doing your research through other providers is a good way to get there and feel comfortable. But unfortunately, that is kind of a spot that some communities are in is that they don't have that relationship and they don't feel confident that they can trust their police agency. But I would say find an officer, maybe ask them individually, get an overall stance of where the agency's at. And if you're an agency, be transparent and explain where your agency can and can't, change law and where you have to draw the line, so that people do know what your agency is going to do. And I think those are the hurdles to get over. And if you're clear about those hurdles, then I think the community should feel confident they can come to you and know that it's coming from a place of trust and that you're trying to do the right thing, but you're also bound by state, federal, and local laws.
So, Deputy Chief De La Rosa, does your particular department have any policies with regards to that?
So when it comes to the entire state of New Jersey, we're guided by the Attorney General. There's been a directive out for a long time. We basically don't have any working relationship with ICE when it comes to civil immigration enforcement. We're barred from doing so. We follow the law. There are certain situations where notifications are made, and there are a ton of situations where they're not made and they're not allowed to be made. And I think the one hurdle we did have at the beginning of this year is, people were asking us to notify them when ICE was in town. People were upset when ICE was in town and we didn't let them know. And we basically have to point to the Attorney General directive that says, A, we're not allowed to assist them, and B, they are well aware they're not allowed to assist them. So they are not going to let us know when they're coming in. They're not obligated to let us know when they're coming in. And we've had a couple tough situations. We had a situation where we almost had a standoff on a motor vehicle stop that was right in front of a school that was about to open up in about 45 minutes. So we're in a tough situation. At the end of the day, we have sent our officers out to the Hispanic gathering places, the different cafes and coffee shops. And we made a point to have contacts with people and explain to them, we're not immigration. We're not acting as immigration. We deal with violations of the law, and that's where it ends. And we expect everybody to feel comfortable reporting things to us. We're not feeding information to ICE unless it falls into a very serious crime that's all promulgated by the Attorney General. So our interaction with ICE is very limited, and it's not our role here in New Jersey. You're muted, Sherry.
Sergeant Moore, what can I expect moving forward? If I want to move forward with a sense of hope, if I want to move forward and think, things can be different, in this country. You know, maybe we can have strong police community relations. If I want to move forward and think, you know, the police aren't out to get me, maybe I'm scared, but I want to move forward and think differently. What are some practical implications or recommendations that you have for me to start to build that sense of trust?
I always like to say the meet me at the table motto is we all have to come to a table to have a conversation. And so whether it's you're in the grocery store and you stop by and see an officer, you say hello, that's an opportunity to engage. Because if you see one officer and you meet that officer and you find the human side of them and you begin to create a relationship with them, it allows you more comfortability to continue to create relationships with with other officers. But I think it's really just meeting at the table and to be able to have conversations, but also getting to the know. Go to some of your officer events, go to some of the departments and just have a conversation, but also educate yourself. What is my police department doing? What is their stance on different things? Because the more you can educate yourself, also the more you can understand maybe some of the practices or the things that your department does. And every department is different. And so while we're all from three different departments, we all, uphold the law, but we all as a department do things differently. And so what I may do here could be very different for what the other agencies do. So that's why it's very important to not just believe every department is the same and to really take the time to get to know what your department does and how your officers respond. And if there's ever a moment where you come into a bad encounter, then still have the courage to complain, make a complaint. I'm part of a profession that has a very high standard, and I would love for those that aren't doing it right to be complained on so we can get them out as well. But I think the more positive thing is just have an open heart and an open hand, and the hand to be able to shake, to be able to bridge the gap that allows for us to come together and not live in a divided space of assumption, but more of a transparency and actual real experience.
So, Deputy Chief, if I have a complaint on an officer, as Sergeant Moore said, if something has occurred and I do want to complain, how do I go about that?
So there's tons of ways, reporting officer conduct is just like missing persons. It's just like DV. It's anytime, anywhere, in any way. Our emails for the chief and I are on the website. Our personnel are trained and they have to take the complaints. They got to push it forward. They can call us. They can email us. We will pay attention to social media messaging. However, it's very tough. We've kind of told some of the same people a number of times, like, you're telling us stuff on Facebook Messenger at 3:00 in the morning where we may not see it for days. You have to call us. But just having that discussion and explaining to people that, every complaint that comes in is investigated. Again, the body cam is a great tool. I remember doing IA years ago. It was terrible because you had to interview a bunch of people, and a lot of it is he said, she said. Now with the camera, the camera doesn't lie, so we can see what happened at that time and make a judgment call on whether or not it was accurate or not accurate. And sometimes it really is just educating the public on what occurred, why it occurred. Some people are upset that two officers show up on motor vehicle stops. We have an SOP that says it's two officers on every motor vehicle stop unless the officer calls off the second officer, especially now that we have a body cam. So it's just developing that relationship and informing the public that we're going to investigate everything, and no one should be apprehensive about telling us what happened, telling us what they had issues with. And to tell you the truth, there are so many incidents that come in where you have a conversation with somebody, as the IA officer or as a deputy chief. I've made a ton of friends off of people calling in about complaints, because sometimes they want to vent, and it may not really be about the officer. It may be about something else they're angry about. And I have several new friends that I've made off of fielding those complaints or having conversations about a complaint.
So we had a great question in our chat box relative to this too. And that was just, how do we share accountability as both the police and the public in showing the public at large hey, we actually follow up on these complaints. Hey, we're actually trying to work together and do something for the common good. Sergeant McKinney?
Yeah, I think the easiest way is making that process not difficult. I think there have been times in the past where police agencies have tried to, in an attempt to protect their officers or because of police unions or you name it, that they've almost made it uncomfortable or hard for people to make a complaint or reach out and have an issue with the police department. And I think breaking down those barriers where citizens can voice concerns and making it easy, while it feels uncomfortable for police departments, it's a valuable tool to kind of see where you're at as an agency and share with communities that you are working to always improve, be better, and answer their concerns. And so I think when an agency makes it known that they're always looking for citizen feedback, whether that's through surveys or through Facebook posts or town hall meetings, there's a ton of different avenues that are just really great ways to let the community know that if they're unhappy with the service they're getting from their police department, we want to hear it. And then also ways to show that you're taking that into consideration and making improvements, because like the deputy chief said, there are a lot of times where people maybe just it was a miscommunication or misunderstanding, or they didn't understand the law that you were required to enforce. The tough fact is a lot of times police officers have to make a hard decision that doesn't end well for the people that call. And that's because we don't have enough evidence, or because a person they care about has to be arrested. You name it, there are times where we make tough decisions and the encounter ends poorly for someone. It doesn't mean that they have to feel like they were slighted or treated unfairly or didn't get an explanation. And I think those are the moments where people really end frustrated with police, is that they feel like somebody got arrested that shouldn't have, and I didn't really get explained why. But oftentimes, if we explain why we're taking someone to jail or why we didn't take someone to jail, those moments really create opportunity to share what we're doing and why we're doing it and ease tension. And so that's a big one for me, as far as just being able to come to the table and share explanations. It's always about that for me, the why.
So I kind of like to wrap up today, like I said, with this sense of actual hope and practical things that we can do moving forward. So I think that y'all talked quite a bit about different practical things that police can do, better transparency, informational outlets, and so forth. What about some things that we as citizens can do to strengthen relationships? What if I want to learn more about the realisms of policing, and is it like what I see, when I watch TV? Can I go on a ride along with your department? Or, what can I do to actually better engage and really learn the field more?
I'll go for us. We do offer ride-alongs, but I would say the best for us to really know the behind the scenes is we do English and Spanish police academies, citizen police academies, and those are an opportunity to get behind the scenes tours, conversations that you may not be able to have on the road, opportunities to kind of get real questions answered. But if your department doesn't host Citizens Police Academy, then opportunities just to invite the police department to house your house of faith, to certain events that you have. There's always an opportunity for an officer to come and speak in those situations, and then just to go to the events itself.
Sergeant McKinney?
Sorry. Yeah. I think for our agency, being able to kind of continue to build on a lot of this stuff, and the hope that I look towards is that I'm not alone in this. Obviously, the three panelists, we're from across the country. We've met in passing, but there is this bigger net that is growing, this bigger network that is growing of officers across the country that are really focused on a lot of the things that we've talked about today. And this is a growing movement and kind of a growing concentration to really focus on how we start community first and how we really take everybody into consideration that we're policing. And so the hope that I leave with and the kind of conversation should overarchingly be about the trend in policing nationally. And I think the big trend nationally is that a lot of agencies are really starting to understand that the focus has to come from the community, and the advice and input should be community-based, because that's who we're serving. And so that's kind of where I lead and where I look forward to going, and the direction I see policing in general going. I know my agency's headed that way. And I know that everybody I've spoken with through the network of Movement Forward and Leeson and all these other fantastic organizations that are doing work in this space. So that's my hope. That's what I look forward to, is to continue to build.
And how about you, Deputy Chief? What would be your recommendations and sort of your sense of moving forward?
I think we have to understand the history of policing and the problems we're having today, and some of the ideas we have today. They've been tried in the past, and I think our really difficult job is balancing what we do with our finite resources. And at the end of the day, a more highly trained department, administrations that actually do support their officers. We're coming out of quite possibly the darkest time in our country in policing in 2020 and the years following 2020, is just supporting our cops, directing them on how to do the job with compassion, directing them that we are, the one thing is we are the only people that really do what we do. You have social workers, you have priests, you have other things, but we are the only people that are out there to lock up people who are victimizing other people. So that has to be our primary focus, but it really has to be done with a really good perspective on what we're doing and how we're doing it, how it's affecting our community, and having that relationship with the community about what is really bothering them, what are the problems, whether it's speeding, loud noise, you name it. You take that feedback and you kind of direct your response with that in mind, and you have a dialogue. We have certain areas where we have huge quality of life issues, and we had people come in from the community and we explained to them, you're this anonymous, your name will never get out. It's going to be me and the chief, and you guys coming in will not even go out to our officers. It's going to be a group of concerned citizens, and we've tailored our response to deal with that. And as time goes on, we do follow up. We do send emails every couple months and say, hey, how are things going? Remember, let us know if there are things going on we need to know about. If we don't know about it, we can't act on it. So, I do have a lot of hope for the Englewood Police Department. Recruiting for all police departments is tougher nowadays. I think we're kind of starting to turn the corner. I think the more we get the positive messages out there with our social media, in the last 5 days, I've put out 3 posts on some of the phenomenal work our officers have done. And again, perception is reality. So if you do not let your citizens know the good things you're doing, their perception of the police department may be different. So it's just, when it comes down to it, balance what you're trying to do, train and support your officers, and really engage with your community and develop relationships. At the end of the day, your relationships in anything is kind of what drives you, whether it's finance, whether it's policing. If you have good personal relationships, you can begin to progress forward, and each side has a perspective of what the other side is going through and actually builds to real solutions on what you're trying to do.
Yeah, so there's a positive opportunity actually to move forward right now. We have a lot of community members, maybe people on our webinar today that are planning some welcoming week events. What advice would you give them for how they can work with their local departments to, be inclusive to the community as a whole, but have officers from different departments together to maybe create a sense of trust and bonding, as well as, build that bridge, so to speak?
So for Englewood during the warmer weather, we do fortunately have a ton of block parties. We get permit requests to close down streets, and neighbors get together and have barbecues and potlucks and things like that. And prior to joining the administration, I would actually just stop by block parties and walk around. And it was funny. The first thing was, "What's wrong? Are we too loud? Did somebody complain?" I said, "No, I just want to come and meet people." And the real downfall from that was all the weight I would gain, because all of a sudden people see you and they know you're there just to meet people. All of a sudden you have all this food coming, and it's, especially for me, it's tough to turn down food. But, now we have these block parties and people know, "Hey, can you have some officers come out?" So I don't think there's a block party, a birthday, anything we've ever turned down where they say, "If we can have some officers come out." We just had one that happened again this year, and I think it's 3 or 4 years running. We sent 2 or 3 officers with a motorcycle, a ton of giveaways, and it's just an hour. And the one thing I could say to people and to departments, you don't have to start big. You're eating the elephant. You got to do it a bite at a time. So one little thing at a time, and just keep doing little things, and they build. Don't feel like you have to have a huge program. It's not a huge shell out. Even if you send officers for an hour or a half hour, whatever it is, it's going to pay off in building those relationships.
Sergeant Moore, what would you tell people on our call that, are in your state on what they can do to reach out to get the police departments involved in some of these Welcome Week events?
For us in Georgia, a good majority of us have some person or personnel in a community engagement unit or a community affairs unit. So it would be just to kind of reach out to them, ask them what events they have, but more likely just invite them to your event. That's kind of the first place to go. And a lot of us kind of do a lot of sharing of events within our kind of internet work here at Georgia. And so if there's an event that maybe outside of my jurisdiction, I usually share it with that officer and we just kind of join up. But I think, just for the most part, is reaching out to the department to say, "Hey, we would love an officer to come out." Because like Deputy Chief said, we do have a ton of officers who go and hang out at different events, and it's almost more expected for, "Hey, we're going to reach out, have an officer come by." The officer just comes by for a little bit. And like I said, one hello at a time is how you start the conversations and how you start to build those relationships. So yeah, just go ahead and invite, and don't be afraid. Enjoy the uniform coming up. Not everything is a bad day when you see an officer. And I think if you start it that way, then you begin to kind of build a different type of relationship with the officer.
I think that is probably a perfect kind of resolution point. You summed us up nicely there, Sergeant Moore, that not every day is a bad day, right? That officer could be bringing you an ice cream cone. You never know. I saw a project once out of Georgia where that's where they were doing. They were giving out ice cream cones rather than tickets. So it's quite interesting. So I want to thank everybody that has joined us today. Encourage you again, reach out to your departments, plan activities and events, bridge the gap, because it is a two-way street, right? We both have to come to the table, both as officers and departments, but as well as community. We all have to be willing to come to the table to talk in order to bridge that divide and bridge that gap. It can't just be done on one angle. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Anthony, and thank you for today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sherry. And to each of you, I have been watching our chat, and there are so many wonderful comments coming in. I do want to highlight one to share with each of you. You probably saw it, but it is basically to say to each of you, the people you serve are fortunate to have you in your role. And I think that is very much true. We all appreciate you for the service that you are providing in your communities and for being examples to not only others in your roles, but also to people in various communities. It means a lot. And so thank you all so much for sharing this today with all of us. We're very, very grateful to you. To our attendees, just a couple of quick reminders for you. As I've shared, this is being recorded. We're going to clean up the recording and get it out to you in the next couple of days. So look for that coming your way. And if we didn't get to your question, we will do our best to follow up with you. So rest assured, we will work on that for you. So do not distress. And then lastly, when we close out here, you're going to see a quick survey. I would certainly appreciate it if you take just a few moments to respond to that. One about today's webinar, but also what you want to see us present to you going forward. We know there's a lot of important topics and different things happening right now that people are looking for help with, and so we want to make sure we're providing content that you need. So please take a moment and let us know about that. So thank you, all of you, for sharing your time with us today. And again, to all of our panelists today, Deputy Chief De La Rosa, Sergeants Moore and McKinney, and Dr. Skaggs, thank you all so very much for sharing your time with us. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of the day and a great week. Stay well and stay safe, everyone. Thank you. Take care.